is stopped. Well, it sucks like it's live on Restream, but it's stopped on my share. Can y'all hear us? Hello, hello. Hello out there. Can y'all hear us?
Trying to find the new link. Where is it? It's the same link.
The one I shared is not working, but we're still live. So, oh, it looks like the sound is working, Andrew says, and I'll put the link to the live in.
I'm trying to find the new link. Where is it? It's the same link.
There you go. Sound is definitely working because I just heard you. Yay, they can hear us. Sorry about that, everybody. Now we also happen to have enough viewers to get started as we were trying to figure that out. So that worked out. So greetings. My name is Onya Sanvu. I am joined by my very good friend Ebony, and this is weekly Pan-African News Live. This is a weekly show that we at All African People's Revolutionary Party New Mexico started about 2 months ago. And the reason we started this show is because we are a revolutionary Pan-African Socialist Party, just one chapter of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And we noticed that a lot of the information about COVID-19 that was being put out by the people in charge was like incorrect and inaccurate and not helpful to our people, on top of the fact that like a lot of the media coverage of African people in Africa is like super racist. And so we were like, why don't we make our own platform to talk about the news and talk about the pandemic from our perspective and to give our people the information, like accurate information, that they need to be safe and to navigate this moment. So that's how Weekly Pan-African News began. And once again, this is a project of All African People's Revolutionary Party New Mexico, which is the New Mexico chapter of the APRP, which is a permanent mass revolutionary Pan-African party with the objective of Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. Because when Africa is free, Africans everywhere will be free. And I want to toss it to Ebony to introduce herself. What's up? I'm sorry, themselves. What's up?
Okay. I use she, her pronouns. I also use they, them, theirs pronouns. My name is Ebony. I'm from Portland, Oregon. Been an organizer for about 12 years. I started well, that's not actually true, but I started most of my organizing as a college student on a college campus. Like we have literal white supremacists on our campus. And so one of my first organizing experiences was organizing their removal and just to protect Black and African folks on the campus. So yeah, I mean, I think that work has carried me this far. And you mentioned, we've obviously organized together in Black Lives Matter Portland. I've also been a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party in Portland, Oregon. So yeah, I mean, I'm just happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm excited to talk about organizing.
Oh, thanks, Ebony. And as always, we want to start off the show by acknowledging that we are on stolen land. The entire Western Hemisphere was stolen from Indigenous nations, and those Indigenous nations still exist, and they're fighting to get their land back. And just like the APRP is fighting to get Africa back, we must stand in solidarity with that struggle. So definitely want to start off by acknowledging that I am speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, and that New Mexico chapter organizes on occupied Tiwa territory, and that is still their land, and they're going to get it back, but we have anything to do about it. Also, we always want to start in the show by calling in an ancestor, and I'm going to pass it to Ebony to talk about who that ancestor is.
Yeah, so I'll just be brief. But the ancestor we wanted to call in today was Ella Jo Baker. So Ella Jo Baker was an organizer who was involved in many organizations, which included the NAACP, SCLC, and SNCC. And I think just one of my favorite things about Ella Baker was the way she held folks accountable and got folks together, namely MLK, but that it wasn't limited to MLK. And so Ella Jo Baker was also a person who often asked the question, who are your people, which Charlene Carruthers talks about in her most recent book, Unapologetic, but that's derived from Barbara Ransby's autobiography on Ella Jo Baker. And so I think that question is really important, is in terms of I think AAPRP has always been an organization, insofar as that I knew, that was super interested in advocating for folks to be in an organization, whether it was AAPRP AAPRP or not. And so I think that question sort of speaks to that energy. It's like, who are your people? Who are you doing this work for and with, and who are you accountable to and with throughout this process? So I just appreciate Ella Baker and would love to, call her in today.
Thanks so much. So Ebony is definitely my people. Ebony is like one of the folks I feel closest to in the entire world. And the reason for that is that Ebony and I helped start the Black Lives Matter chapter in Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon is often advertised as like the whitest major US city. And that is accurate. The show Portlandia is like pretty accurate, but Portland also has like an extremely robust history of African resistance and African organizing, a lineage that Ebony is directly connected to. And so in like the process of like starting that chapter and in the process of doing work in that chapter and doing work within the Black Lives Matter movement, we went through like a lot of stuff. We went through like a lot of stuff. Yeah. We learned a lot of things, some hard lessons, some easy lessons. We developed like a lot of skills. We built like really tight relationships. And so this show, for the political education section that we do every single show, we want to talk about some of the lessons that we learned from organizing in the Black Lives Matter movement. And this is in the period from like 2014 to 2016. Mm-hmm. And the reason we want to talk about this is because right now we're seeing like a resurgence of a lot of like some of this like very similar strategies, very similar analysis, very similar organizations. And so we thought we had something to contribute to this moment based on our experiences and based on what we learned. So Ebony, what are some things that you learned from Black Lives Matter?
I literally have a whole page full of lessons, and I feel like that's not it. I honestly was just like, okay, I feel very comfortable, obviously, talking to you. So I was like, I don't need to prepare too much for this. I'm just writing a few things down, and it was like 10 things. So maybe I'll just start off with a few. So I think that one of the things that like I've learned, not in just organizing with Black Lives Matter Portland, but that was really the lessons became more, I guess, tangible and like legible during that time period that you were mentioning. But I think one of the things that has been really important to me, and I also credit AAPRP for this as well, is just like the importance of political education. I think it's like really important. And I think when we, we're involved in like trying to, start Black Lives Matter Portland, that's something that we had to struggle with. And I think in some way we didn't even know that we needed it, but at the same time we knew that something was missing. And so I say that to say political education is so important. It's at the root cause of organizing, or in terms of doing organizing well, in my opinion. And I think one key component of political education that I always really appreciated about my experience in AAPRP and later in Black Lives Matter Portland is reading our ancestors, reading the folks who are still alive, who have so much to teach us about this work. And so with that, I also think that, reading and engaging with like, work from the past or work where folks have, been doing similar things that we can sort of look to as like our guides is really important. But I also think it's really important to, look critically also and not romanticize, for example, the Black Power movement or the Civil Rights movement. Perhaps rather, it's more useful to say what were the strengths of those movements and what were the limitations, if any at all. And I think that, that has a lot to do with just like strategy in general. It's like we can't just sort of, every strategy can't be applied haphazardly to everything. I mean, there's things that work, like, the breakfast program, like AAPRP took that up in Portland, like it just works. But there's certain things that like don't work, and that's okay. I think that's just like organizing is not a monolith, and it requires that study requires us to be engaged with like the people that we are organizing with and organizing for, including ourselves. And so that's just like one thing that I think is super duper important. And then I'll just share like two more, and then maybe I'll just stop because I want to hear from you. I think something else that's really important is accountability. I think that, in my experience, and it wasn't just with like Black Lives Matter Portland, but I think, one of the things that remains to be so critical and so important to me and to any organizing spaces that I choose to be a part of is accountability. I think it's really hard sometimes when this work pulls on us in so many ways for us to be thinking more proactively about how to sustain ourselves, which is what organizing is about, a sustained movement towards a goal to get our folks free. But I also think that, again, that's super hard, but I think that movements and organizations even constantly fail without having this a part of their strategy. I think it's really tempting to go, oh my gosh, let's just have an ideological framework and like organize for that. And it's like, yeah, but we are people too. We are part of that strategy. We can't sustain this work without thinking about how even this work, like even the organizing work, can be tainted. Like that, there's a reason why like bourgeoisie feminism exists. Like even our work can become tainted by the very things we are seeking to like undermine or undo or destroy or replace or not replace and totally reimagine something else. So I think that I say that to say I think accountability is really important, but you can't have accountability without reflection. And I think that it's directly tied to political education, but also just reflecting, like when we're organizing things, okay, we're organizing this program. What were the strengths? What were the limitations? Giving space to really uplift what we did well, because I think that's a part of movement spaces that I also see is missing. Is I think sometimes we have the idea that, and I think this is true in part, but I also find it sometimes problematic, which is, we should just do this work at all costs. Like there's no repercussions and we're only committed if we like die doing this work. And it's like, that's great. That's cool. I'm in it till the death of me, honestly, and have been since I've known organizing to be something that like I deeply care about. But I'm also just sort of like, okay, but like, what are the ways that we can sustain our people in this work? It doesn't have to be either or, it can be both and. Because so many organizations I've been a part of have had, issues with like low capacity and low turnout. And I think, in my opinion, that also stems from not caring and looking at the people that we're actually organizing with as also people who needed to be tended to, not just the others over there in a community or a section that we see as so marginalized. But like a lot of the people that I organize with are Black queer folks, they're Black trans folks, they're Black disabled folks, they're Black fat folks. They are mothers who are often marginalized from spaces. They're parenting folks who are often have their their loyalty, I guess, to organizing called into question because they have children who are seen as burden in our spaces. So, I mean, those things I think are really important. I think if we want to sustain this work, we have to somehow not wait for conflict to arise and know that it's going to happen because we're people. We can't wait for each other to fuck up as much as we're able to. We have to sort of build some infrastructure to not go, oh my gosh, where we're scrambling. Oh my gosh, if there's someone who, because I mean, this happened in our movements, if we're like looking close enough, like misogyny, patriarchy, it's still happening. It's not in the past, it's present. And that is also a part of our work is to undo and work at that stuff too. So, I mean, I said I was going to say 3 things, but I would just like to stop now.
Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate that. And everything that you said resonated with me, especially like the importance of political education, the importance of applying, like testing out the ideas you're reading and recognizing what's working and what's not. Like, I feel like in the initial stages of Black Lives Matter, and this wasn't unique to the Portland chapter, this was like, the whole country in the network, we were like turning up. We were like shutting down traffic every weekend. We were like shutting down airports, shutting down malls, like doing like pretty militant actions that had like big impacts. But like the transformative moment for me, like the first part was getting like being in the BLM national network and being in the HIP at the same time and like seeing the differences and seeing like what one could add to the other. But then the turning point for me, even beyond that, was Philando Castile. And the reason why was because the video of him being murdered fucking autoplayed on my feed. So I was like forced to watch it without expecting it. And that was like hard on its own, but I remember like watching it and like at that point we were like 2 years in and like we had like, shut down airports, shut down malls, like we had stopped traffic in the city of Portland. We stopped all the traffic and all the trains in the city of Portland 2 times without anyone getting arrested. But even after we had done all that work, even after like, you know, breaking our backs, burning ourselves out, like, you know, people like, I saw people leave the movement for good because it was like, going so hard and there was no space. Like, even after all that, I watched that video and I was like, nothing's gonna be different. Like this dude just motherfucking died. He was just like murdered point blank. And despite the fact that it's clear, despite all the work, despite all the energy, despite, you know, this whole movement, it's gonna go down the same way. There's not gonna be justice. This woman and this child are gonna be demonized. Belinda's gonna be demonized. Like it was just like, it just like hit me in like a really hard way that like all of this work, all of this building, all of this momentum wasn't really amounting to like a changed outcome. And like if in that moment I had not been in the APRP as well, that probably would have been it for me as well. I probably would have dipped because like it's like really hard to put in that much work. And it's like we were figuring out, like we were building the plane as it was flying, as I've heard people say, like we were figuring out as we went, like the strategies that were going to work, how we were able to like planning more advanced actions, like figuring out like the structure of the organization in terms of Black Lives Matter. So like we were like figuring it out as we went, but still understanding that and knowing that it was going to be different was very, very difficult for me. And like the value that the APIP brought to me was like a bigger picture understanding of why it wasn't going to be different and how we could change how this went down, which was by building power for African people and by overthrowing it. Like there's no freedom for our people while this system exists. That's it. Like it has to be destroyed or we're never going to be free. It's never going to stop. So yeah, like just like the importance of political education, of like studying together rather than trying to reinvent the wheel as if like our ancestors hadn't put in like hundreds of years of work for us to learn from, but instead like looking at what they did and seeing what they tried and what didn't work and what did, and like moving based on that was like super important. And then the other thing was that, yeah, like these organizations, the concept of organization versus mobilization is something I want to talk about, is because like, you know, we're seeing massive marches of, you know, hundreds to thousands of people all over the world at this point because of we're in this moment where folks are able to see what African people see plainly every single day, which is that we are colonized and oppressed people and that we are being exploited and murdered by the state. And so folks are mad about that and they're taken to the streets. And a lot of folks are talking about this, like this has the potential to be like the revolution we've been waiting for. I am skeptical about that. And I want to know your thoughts about that in terms of this question of organization versus mobilization.
Yeah, sure. I think that, you know, and this is just off the top of my head because I haven't thought about it, but obviously I think about it in general. But I think that you know, I think that mobilizing has its strengths, but it's not equipped to sustain uh the work that's necessary to get our people free. So I think that, you know, mobilizing is like a tactic where if we need to gather people en masse or gather a group of people around a particular action, but I think organizing is a much broader and larger, like sustainable uh, thing that has to be like it has to. I keep saying a thing. It has to be a thing. Like mobilizing, I think usually has an end date, and organizing is like it's sustained until like we're free. And so I think there are limitations to like gathering around energy that is always going to like end. But I think these like larger systems that you're naming, that I know the AAPRP, you know, is believes in like ideologically is really important. I think that, you know, organizing work requires like looking at the whole. It's about, you know, developing our people, like, you know, in terms of political education, but also as like leaders too, to go on and like organize other people to like continue to be in this movement. Because as we've been talking about, you know, like we need people to be involved in this work. There's so much work to do. So like, you know, it's not sustainable to be like, hey, can you come to this march and like be here? Like, we're going to do this until we like get some like justice. It's like justice is always already flawed. The fact that we even need justice is an issue to begin with. Like, so it's like, I don't know. I'm rambling now. But yeah, I think that those are like my thoughts for right now on mobilizing and organizing. What do you think?
I was not rambling. That was very clear to me. But yeah, I agree. That's just like it's not sustainable, right? Like moments like these where people are taken to the streets because they feel drawn, like called to do so because they have been exposed to injustice and they're like, I have to do something. And so they take to the streets, and that's positive, but it's not sustainable because organizing marches, organizing actions, being in a march, being attacked by the police, is not something that you can do consistently. It's just not something that has like legs, I guess is how I would put it. Like it's not going to last past like, a couple of months. And this is a pattern that we could see even within like the larger African liberation struggle in the United States and like throughout the world. Like we rise up because we reach a point where we're like, this is too much. Like y'all are playing in our faces. We can't do this. And we get angry and we rise up. It's often looked very similar to what's happening in Minneapolis. Like we have, Detroit, LA, like almost every major US city had an uprising like that. And so we have this period where folks are like, this is enough. And they like express their anger, they express their pain. And then maybe like after like a couple of weeks, maybe after a couple of months, it stops, it fizzles out. Because again, like you're going out there face to face with police, with white supremacists, with the entire force of the system, and you are defenseless and you are in a mass that is like, has like a lot of emotion, a lot of commitment, but not a lot of organization, which means that it's just wrecked by the state repression. And so after like a couple of times of that, a couple of times around doing that, people just get burnt out. And that's kind of what I was referring to when, I saw people go join Black Lives Matter, go hard as hell for like a year and then leave the movement forever. Like strong organizers, people who I deeply cared about, because it just wasn't, it's not sustainable. It's not the pace of mobilization when that is the only tactic is not sustainable. It burns people out. And what organization does is build infrastructure, build institutions, and also, as you pointed out, create leaders in the movement who have like a clear analysis of what their position is and how to contribute to the collective. And because that infrastructure exists, because those relationships exist, it like sustains people, it holds them up. And so that's like the really key thing is that mobilization is an important tactic. It's like a show of power. It can be if it's backed by organization, but on its own, it's not going to achieve what we need it to. And it's not enough, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think, just to like build off what you're saying, it's not that, mobilizing, as you said, like people are done. And there's so many times where there's resurgences of like being done. And there's nothing wrong with being done and being in the streets in that way. But I think what we're both saying is that, again, it's not something that is sustainable. Like it's not something that's sustainable. And I think what I've been trying to figure out, navigate what my role is as someone who's in the academy, but also has like such a huge background in organizing, and taking a little bit of a break for myself as I'm transitioning from a new city. Like what is my role in like observing what's happening without shaming folks, but also how can I, be preparing myself to get right back in an organization that's going to be here when those folks need somewhere else to go. And again, like doing work like this is like, we see y'all, that work is also needed. And we're here if you also want to invest that kind of energy into something that's sustainable. So I think, I don't know, I'm just thinking about that a lot, in terms of like, how do we recognize and, because I think about, I was organizing in college, like, I'll tell my age, but I was organizing like in college in like 2008 and stuff like that. So, I obviously have been like, repoliticized around lots of different things. But I remember when we were starting and, after, the murder of like Michael Brown, like that was like Trayvon Martin and other folks, like, that was a huge sort of like, people really politicized around their untimely murders and deaths. So I try to put myself in that space of like, what does it mean to be like coming to terms with things? Maybe you have already had those like small gems, but you're like, oh shoot, it's like all hitting the fan, and now things are coming together, and I just have no choice but to be out in these streets. Like, how do I hold space for folks? Because I was there at some point too. And then again, like, what does it look like? As I don't think that it's, I actually personally just don't think it's that helpful to be like, why are you in the streets? And it's just sort of like, okay, because people are going to do this for forever and ever and ever. But what we can do is continue to do what we've been doing, which is organizing and letting folks know, like, hey, if you're around, like if you're still here, like this is an organization that's also doing this thing, or that has been doing this thing. We've been doing this, or like, what we're doing, like these are our lessons, like that we've thought about, so if folks want to continue this work in a different way. And also just like marching is, I don't know, it's like one of my other like lessons. And it's not a lesson that I own. None of these lessons I own, but it's something that I feel like I've known for a long time and other people have known for a long time. Our ancestors have known for so long. But like marching and being out in the streets is really important. I don't think this work could be possible without that. But it's just marching is just one tactic, one thing. There's so many ways to like organize. And it's just like everyone literally cannot be in the streets. And so how are our movements and also organizations making space for multiple different kinds of people to do this work? If we only have space for like charismatic cis heterosexual Black men to be on a bullhorn, then like we need to think differently. If we actually only have space for folks who can show up every single solitary meeting, action thing, otherwise they're like solidarity, their loyalty is called into question. I think it's not helpful. That doesn't, not to suggest that folks shouldn't be committed and that this work isn't ongoing and that it doesn't take careful time, consideration, and tending to, which requires so much of us. True, but I think that one of the things that I've seen in organizing spaces that I've either facilitated, been a part of, it's a failure, is to not know how to make space for different kinds of capacity and different kinds of people and different kinds of work. There's like, even if a person can't do this particular thing, there's something that they can do, even if it's like making the flyers, even if it's at home, like doing the behind the scenes to make something like this happen, which a comrade was on here doing. Like that's helpful. Like none of this work is possible. And I think we just have to like reimagine and complicate our definition of even action. It's ableist, constantly ableist. It leaves folks out, and it's actually not an accurate depiction of the organizing work that it takes. There are so many folks, we read it in our books all the time, but maybe miss it. I'm sure like some of us obviously know this, but like we need folks to cook. Like people need to eat. Like people we need to raise money for like well funds. Like we need folks looking after children, like not just daycare, but like educating them as well, like engaging them in political education. Like there's so many different parts of our movements that needs different kinds of work. And I just really, it breaks my heart, honestly, to see folks who are energized in some way, and maybe it doesn't look legible to you, or maybe it doesn't look what we think like a leader should be, or someone who's like qualified or like loyal to the movement. But it breaks my heart to see those folks be pushed out of spaces because our organizations sometimes only have the capacity for a certain kind of person and a certain kind of leader and a certain kind of work, when quite frankly we need our work actually as organizers is to find a space for them to feel like they could be in this work. Like I think that's the work, in my opinion, of an organizer and of an organization is, yeah, there's different kinds of people and there's different kinds of capacities, but how can we all contribute to this work? Because last time I checked, there's so much work to be done. So like, while we're trying to marginalize people from our organizing spaces, I can't find a reason why we want to do that. But yeah.
Fully agree. And I feel like all the things you're pointing out about the uplifting of certain kinds of leaders, of certain kinds of tactics, is a consequence of uplifting mobilization as a strategy over building organization. Because like I emphasized when I was explaining what the APIP is, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, I said it's a mass revolutionary political party, a Pan-African Socialist Party. And the mass part means that as a PIP, we're trying to organize like every single motherfucking African person, like every single African person, regardless of identity, regardless of ability, regardless of age, every single African person we're trying to put into an organization with like the shared objective of liberating our land and liberating our people. And that means that if we're like, the way that we're going to make the revolution is you have to march for 50 miles, and if you can't do it, then you're not in, then it's not going to work for like the majority of our people. So like it's about like building movements that have space for every single person. And the only way that you can do that is through building organizations that create space for every single person, creating institutions, creating infrastructure to bring in all segments of our people, because there's absolutely no way that any revolution for African liberation is going to be successful unless we mobilize, unless we activate and organize and like raise the consciousness of the majority of our people. That's why the APIP has the structure it does, where we have like cadre, but it's like flat, where like everybody has to say in what we do, because we're trying to turn every single person through the political education process, through the organizing structure of the APRP, into a leader within the Pan-African movement. So that if I, for whatever reason, I'm like taken out, it doesn't matter, because APRP New Mexico has like 6 other people in the cut who can take my place. That's the whole point. It's just like, yeah, I think that we have to examine, like strongly examine how it was that mobilization became the default, when in reality, like the lineage, like the history of African radical organizing and African revolutionary organizing is one of infrastructure, is one of organization. Like that's what Ella Baker represents. That's what Amilcar Cabral represents. That's what all of our, like Harriet Tubman had organization and infrastructure. So like, how did we get to the point where like the only way we move is like, okay, we're meeting at 5 on the block because we're mad and we're gonna march for a while. Like that's important, but it's not gonna do what we need to do to get free. This conversation is really good, but there's a couple other things I want to make sure that we cover before we move on. It's also like, I feel like not enough time because you're so brilliant, and I feel like we should do this.
I want to come back. Thank you. You're brilliant.
But one thing I want to talk about that was like definitely like a major thing, I think it's like a major part for anyone doing this kind of work, is like beef in the movement. So we had like really what did you say?
But I wasn't prepared, but I'm ready.
Okay. Yeah. So we don't have to get into like specifics unless you want to, but like there was like, I feel like we don't have to get into specifics because it happens in so many different contexts where, because it's like high stakes, because we are a colonized people with an intense amount of trauma from like the constant violence that is visited upon us by the system, because capitalism teaches us to really value like the whole person, beef emerges as almost like as an inevitable consequence of this kind of moment and this kind of work. And so I personally learned a lot of lessons from being in Black Lives Matter about how to navigate it and how not to navigate it, because I definitely did it incorrectly many times. And so I just wanted to know like your thoughts on this question, on your thoughts on like why it happens and like how you've learned to deal with it.
Yeah. And just everyone keep in mind, I haven't thought this all the way through, but I do have some thoughts that kind of coincide with some things I wrote down. So one, I think like in terms of beef, I think the first thing that I would say is the idea that we're going to live in a world, and if there's conflict, like that there's going to be no conflict ever. Like I just don't even understand like why we would even think that. I also think that I think conflict and harm or abuse are all different. They're actually all different things. And I think one of the failures, I think, of organizations that I've been a part of, specifically when harm or abuse has been literally done to me, is not being able to make distinctions between those things. Because I totally hear how, it's obviously been an objective of whole organizing, or like organizations like COINTELPRO, to use the inner turmoil of Black or African organizations to pit people against each other and have them defocus on the work, and then people actually got killed and like murdered and all these things. So it's deeply important that that organizing is our goal, and that beef or arguments or abuse or harm or any of those things get like addressed. So I guess to reiterate, I would say, one, that conflict like is going to exist and it's going to happen, but I think we have to have strategies on how to deal with them that are not just like stop having conflict, focus back on the work. Like that is the most like limiting strategy I've ever seen and heard. And it has never, like even in the moments that I'm remembering that this stuff happened, it never worked. It never worked because it's not a strategy to be like, just focus on the work like that. No. So one. and then like harm and abuse. So like, I guess I'm saying is like, well, one, I think my response would be is like, what do we mean by beef? Because there were some things that happened to me where I've literally had things done to like my personhood where people were sexually harassing me and it was rendered as beef when it wasn't beef to be like sexually harassed in an organizing space. And then, you know, you have whole Black and African people looking at you like you're like trying to cause turmoil and not focus on the work. And you're like, I can't do the work if it requires that I'm going to be do this, that I'm going to be have to be subjected to this. So I'm going to leave. And that's not sustainable either. But we have to, I mean, I think I say this to say too, is like conflict and other things are going to happen. So I think the building the infrastructure, when I was mentioning stuff around accountability, is really important. Fortunately, like one of the spaces that I had left, like I think that I was a part of a lesson that they learned and they got it together and I rejoined again because I thought, okay, well, like I actually didn't want to not be here, but I'm not going to also be like, I'm not going to have like some of this stuff happening. But when we are ready to address it and I understand where you're at, cool, I'm going to go do what I do because no matter what organization I'm in, I'm always going to be organizing for the liberation of my people. But when you get it together, when you're ready to do that work, then I'll come back and be here. So I don't know. I think, the call in, call out culture stuff is really complicated. And I think that, I think it needs to be thought through, but I do think there are people that are thinking it through. And I think a lot of the discourse that I see around call and call out culture on like the internet and stuff is really divisive and is not capacious enough to hold all the nuance that needs to be figured out. But I do think that what it lets me know, rather than me just telling you my opinion on call out and call out culture, is that what it lets me know is that we have work to do around this stuff. Like we have work to do around how do we create spaces, mechanisms, modalities for people to express harm because it's not going to not happen. So the goal is not to not have it happen. Sure, we have conversations around like should it even be happening on the internet, etc. I have mixed opinions about it, but I mean, I'm rambling now, so that's what I'll just say. I think we need to have specific people in organizations thinking about that and considering that as the work. Like this big, large, ideological, free, whatever, like that's lovely and great. That's what we're here for. And like having folks invested in building accountability, reading up on this stuff, looking to our ancestors to see what they did, constantly working on this. Like this needs to be a thing, which Charlene Carruthers talks about in her book, but like isn't the first time it's been said. Like we need someone and someone's to be like invested in like some sort of healing justice accountability work always forever, even when there's not beef harm, abuse or whatever happening in these spaces, because this is exactly what's going to continue to happen is people are going to fall out, people are going to leave, and perhaps people won't if there's actually more mechanisms to do this work. And then just making it clear that this is a work in progress. We're all a work in progress. And so we might not get it right, but we're working at it. Like we're working at this. And I think that's really important. I just think it's a failure to not work at that and to wait constantly for conflicts and beefs and things like that to arise and then be scrambling. And then you lose people, you do more harm in the process. And then organizations remain fragmented and our people are always in such a fragile state with the pervasiveness of anti-Blackness. So it's just sort of like we need to be thinking about this work often. I don't know, blabbing, but that's what I think so far. I have more to say, but that's what I think because I want to know what you think and what you learned because I'm sure I'm going to agree. Also, I just want to know.
Yeah, you basically encapsulated what I feel about it. That like, yeah, a lot of what's being framed as beef is actually like abusive behavior. Kind of what happened to me a couple of times. And then also that like, yeah, conflict is an inevitable part of organizing. And we have to like stop considering conflict as a distraction and start considering conflict as like part of the work. Exactly what you said. Because we are living in a society in which we've been indoctrinated by capitalism, by colonialism, by patriarchy, by misogynoir, by ableism, by fat phobia, by like all kinds of shit that impacts how we engage with each other, that impacts how we treat each other. And so understanding that if our objective is to destroy that system, then we have to destroy it within each of us. And that's like a lifelong process. For me, like the transformative, like the realization that like changed how I thought about this, because I like, you know, I started off with like, we need to focus on the work. And this is a distraction and we got to keep it moving and like blah, 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 just get it together. Like the reason that I had a shift in thinking around that was like, I started to really understand how internalized oppression works and how it showed up for me specifically.
Mm-hmm.
It absolutely has an impact on how we engage each other on like a day-to-day basis. And so understanding that, it's much easier to like almost like depersonalize it, meaning that when I harm someone or when someone harms me, I'm not like, you're a fucking asshole. I'm not like, you did that because you suck. I'm like, you did it because we're both colonized. You did it because we're living in a capitalist society. I did it because I'm colonized. I did it because I'm living in a capitalist society. And if I want to stop harming people and if I want to stop being harmed, then the process is to unlearn that shit through a process of political education, through a process of accountability. Like you have to consider, because it happens every time in every organization, in every single movement, we see these conflicts over and over and over again. Literally. It's clear at this point that this is part of the work. If we always are constantly dealing with it, that's part of the work.
I try to be a patient person, but it's the thing that like really gets under my skin is like, it's beef. You really just need to focus on the work. It's some macho shit that doesn't belong in our spaces. I'm just sort of like, it's just these women, these feminized people, these queers, the trans, like it's deeply problematic. It's patriarchal. It's like steeped in heteropatriarchy. It doesn't make any sense if you're actually, and that comes back to who are we reading when we do political education? If we're reading a bunch of, sure, there are so many people who are like men that I deeply respect as organizers, but like, are we actually reading the accounts of Black women who are in the, you know, Black Panther Party? Are we reading accounts of Black women who are in the Black Liberation Army? Are we reading the accounts of all these kinds of folks who have something to offer us? And I mean, I think, yeah, what we're reading is almost just as important as the reading. And also, we talked about the internet a little bit, and I was talking about this with a few friends as well, is how do we organize amidst this thing that we call the internet? Because it's like, oof, it's like a whole thing that, you know, we can't just like ignore. But also, what does that mean for our political education? Like, how do we engage? And I think this is like a perfect example of doing this work. And also, like, what do we mean by political education? Is that just reading? I think the AAPRP has always done a good job of including different kinds of modalities, like films. Like reading is not everyone's thing, and there's multiple different ways that you can read. You can like read through. You can be politically engaged through like films, like through other things. Of course, like reading is like one of the main ways that like we like can get our political education, but like we also have to make, in my opinion, space for other kinds of different engagements. Like, what does it look like to include art in our movements, like that kind of stuff, which when we look back, there are actually people who we consider like the toughest organizers who are also artists. Like, so how do we include, again, different kinds of ways to do this work? I think there's a way to still have the same goal, but to include different kinds of ways and like modalities to think through this stuff that it can hold more people. I know that, like, you know, I know, like, I remember when I started like the Black Collective thing, and then we were like, oh, we should just be Black Lives Matter, and then like you were doing your thing, and then it just was. I remember when I was doing that work, and I was just like, there was a bunch of like Black artists who came to the Black Collective. I think it was like the room was full of so many people, and a good portion of the people were artists, and I was just like, and at the time I didn't identify as an artist, even though I've been a poet for like a long time. But I just was sort of like, didn't know what to do. I was just sort of like, oh, you're an artist, but you're here and you care about Black lives. I just was like, didn't know. I didn't understand. I didn't get it. But like, I think that's also something that's like deeply important to me, is just sort of like being expansive in what we consider as organizing, because I think that's really, I just think it's important, and that we should be including multiple different kinds of people in our work because it's needed, and it reaches different kinds of people. Like, I think this like side thing that I'm doing called like the Black Feminist Kitchen is able to reach so many people because it's not about just academics, it's about organizers, it's about activists, it's also about artists coming together around a common goal, which we call like Black feminism. So, I mean, I think that stuff is really important. I don't know. How are we on time? Are we like, we should be moving on to some of the other things?
We're about at almost an hour of this conversation.
Oh, wow.
But I think it was really, really incredible. And I just want to say, like, so yeah, the idea of organization versus mobilization, understanding that mobilization is not going to sustain us, that we have to build institutions, we have to build infrastructure, and that requires organizations, African organizations. The idea of understanding that conflict is a part of this work. I feel like the majority of organizing is actually relationship building and conflict resolution. Because we're human beings. We're humans, and we're colonized. We're living under capitalism. We internalize like a lot of shit that makes us mistreat each other. And so navigating that and working through that and understanding that that is the work is extremely important. And then, yeah, I'm really grateful that we were able to have this conversation. I think that we should have another one that's going to be longer, maybe like just for this. And I want to yes, thank you. And I want to toss it back to you to talk about the Black Feminist Kitchen.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, I'm from Portland, Oregon. And I think, one of the things that has always been like either a yearning or has underpinned my work is like, is Black feminisms. And it's not to, you know, purify Black feminism or Black feminisms as if we as Black feminists and Black feminisms also don't have work, because just as we have, like, I don't know, some people call like Black queer feminisms or radical Black feminisms, we also have bourgeoisie Black feminism. So I say that, I don't say this lightly, but I think that Black feminism has always been something that I could have never done this work without. And I learned so much of what I know, and I credit to Black feminists. So anyways, I just think that, I was trying to find a space, honestly, on Instagram to hold kind of like my creative inklings. I've been really getting into fashion, and like I've always been into fashion, but like, I don't know, whatever. And also just sort of like, just like, I don't know what I would call this. All artists watching this are gonna be like, what are you talking about? But just like my Instagram post, if anyone follows me on Instagram, I like design my like whatever Instagram stories in a way that I think is aesthetically pleasing, but it also has like a message. It's usually like Black feminist content. So anyways, it started off as that. And then at the same time, I was also thinking that the idea started off as that, but it hadn't emerged. And at the same time, I wanted to host something called the Black Feminist Summer School as like a space where folks, namely Black folks, but also opening up to non-Black POC, just because I think people desperately need Black feminism, but I'm really want to reimagine. This is actually one of my first times doing anything that included non-Black people of color. It's like I've done two things, so mostly anything I've ever done has been like exclusively Black faces. So anyways, it's been interesting. It's been good. So long story short, there's this thing called the Black Feminist Summer School. It started in Portland last year. This year is going online because of COVID-19. It's a space for artists, organizers, activists, and other folks to just come together and meditate around Black feminisms and what it offers us, and perhaps the movement. And it's an opportunity for folks to highlight the work that they're already doing, and also to just learn and think with Black feminisms and how different artists, organizers, and other folks are thinking with Black feminisms through their artwork, through their organizing work, etc. So it's going to be Thursday, July 9th through Sunday, July 12th. And it's a sliding scale. So if you don't have the funds, that's not something that you should worry about. You should register and you will be taken care of. Otherwise, the sliding scale fee goes to to pay folks who are organizing the event, as well as like our ASL interpreters, or the fact that we want to, Sharita Town is going to make us some tote bags, and we want to pay them well, and we also want to give some stuff out for free, and we also have to like buy a fancy Zoom platform that's like encrypted, like all the things. So you all can register at the Black Feminist Kitchen on Facebook. You can all visit me on Facebook. I post about it constantly. I'm not doing this due diligence at all, but if you register and participate, it'll all be explained in a different kind of way that makes more coherent sense. Anyways, this has been wonderful. Thank you for having me on. This is so cool. And yeah, I would love to come back. Thank you for your work. I look up to you so much. And yeah, this is so awesome. And I'm proud of you for starting a chapter 2 in New Mexico. Like, it sounds like it's going well. Like, it's awesome. So yay.
We poppin'. And Ebony and Sharita Town, like you mentioned. And basically, I'm very, very grateful that I was radicalized in Portland, even though I do not care for Portland as a place, but the people that live there, the people that live there, the people that organize there, particularly like the African women, particularly the queer African people, the queer colonized people are incredible. And we're really like, yeah, transformative for me, like really shaped my worldview alongside the APRT. So you're definitely one of those folks. And so I'm really grateful for you.
Right back at you.
Cool. So yeah, you can, so that was the PE section of our show that was drastically extended because we just a lot to say. So now we're going to get into the rest of the program where we're going to talk to y'all about COVID-19 updates for the diaspora and also some work that's happening in New Mexico, particularly around how the state of New Mexico is targeting Black Lives Matter organizers for repression. So we're going to get into all that right now. So first part that we want to talk about is just giving y'all some general updates on COVID-19. Because as I mentioned at the top of the show, like a lot of what the people like in charge under the capitalist system are saying is like not true. It's been inaccurate and it's cost like many people's lives, particularly our people's lives. So first up, very important, is that the second wave is coming. We have been sheltering in place for several months with the intent being to like flatten the curve. Like the whole point of like the flatten the curve strategy was that folks were like told to stay inside, to social distance, etc. And the idea was that we would do that until a public health response could be organized that could address the pandemic. The problem was that even though many people, millions of people, like lost their jobs, made tremendous sacrifices to shelter in place and to practice social distancing and like drastically change their lives in order to flatten the curve, the public health response never came. There was no public health response organized, which means that people are out of work, suffering, and it was ultimately for nothing because now these states are like opening back up again. And they're doing so at a point where the infections in the United States have never been controlled. And now we're basically like, my therapist described it as, and shout out to therapy. My therapist described it as being at the bottom of a roller coaster, like slowly going up the hill, and you can tell like a big drop is coming, and there's like nothing you can do because you're trapped on it. So yeah, second wave is on the way. And probably when that hits, you're going to hear a lot of discourse blaming the mobilizations for African people. And I just want to let y'all know right now that is nonsense. That is not what happened. The reason why we are going to experience the second wave is because the United States has failed in every single level to address this situation to keep people safe. It's not on African people being fed up and taken to the streets because we are experiencing constant injustice. It is on the state and the government that failed on every single level to protect people. So just when you see that on the news, and I guarantee you will, like, just know that it's not true. It's not because we're in the streets, it's because this government failed us. The other thing that's really important is that, you know, like I mentioned, like folks made a lot of sacrifices since like March, and for some people even earlier, to attempt to flatten the curve, to work collectively. And I know that folks are tired. I know you're tired because I'm tired. Like I want to see my friends. I want to like go out to eat. Like I want my life back. But like it's still not over, you know? It's like still a pandemic. And so it's like really, really important that folks continue to be safe, continue to wear a mask. Like that's extremely important, and it's like mad weird. You can't breathe. But I personally kind of like it because like Europeans get like sketched out, and I'm like, you're scared. but like but yeah, like wearing a mask like drastically reduces your chances of like transmitting the infection to other people, and it also protects you to a limited extent from catching it. So make sure that you continue to wear your mask. Make sure that you continue to social distance. Make sure that you continue to avoid touching your face. Make sure you continue to wash your hands frequently and then lotion your hands afterwards. Like keep doing the precautions, and also stay home as much as possible, while also understanding that like there's no stimulus for a lot of people. There's no unemployment for a lot of people. A lot of people can't work and they can't eat. And so it's like an impossible situation. And that's why the APRP and many other organizations have been organizing community defense and mutual aid to fill those gaps. But we understand that this has been a tremendous sacrifice and it feels like it's for nothing, but also understand that the pandemic is not over. And because this government is not gonna do anything to help us, we have to take care of each other. Anything you'd like to add, Ebony, to what I just said?
No, I think you covered it.
Yeah.
I agree with everything.
It's just really, I feel really like, it's just really messed up how hard people worked together to like, to flatten the curve, and like the government did not hold up its end of the deal. It sucks. And then they're gonna blame us because you keep killing us and we're sick of it. It's just like,
yeah, oof. Yeah.
And that's why we say death to the United States. Anyway, so those are the COVID-19 updates. Once again, like it's very, very, very important that you wear a mask. It's very important that you continue to social distance, maintain that 6 feet, maintain that arm's length. It's very important that you continue to disinfect your high touch surfaces, that you continue to wash your hands frequently, and that you continue to stay home as much as you're possible. And you know, the advice is to avoid crowded spaces, but we also understand that there's like there's uprisings happening around the country, and folks feel like they have to be there. Like I feel like I have to be there. So like, if you go to a march, like try your best to maintain that social distancing, and hopefully the organizers of the march are mindful of that. But if they're not, make sure that you and the folks you're with are mindful of it. Like if you are an immunocompromised or you're a vulnerable person, consider like marching away from the main buzz of the march and keeping your distance while still maintaining your presence if you feel like you have to be there. And we're gonna keep, you know, giving you all these tips and updates because we understand that this government is raggedy and they're not helping us. And so we're gonna try to help our people. And then, yeah, as Monica is mentioning in the comments, Monica's an organizer with the APRP New Mexico chapter. They're opening up the economy, all of the United States, like it's happening here in New Mexico, against this backdrop of the coming second wave. So like people, like I have friends who are no longer eligible for unemployment because now work is available. And so they have to go to work, even though they're not getting sufficient protections at work. So they're literally putting their lives in danger for a check, and they're getting cut off from any resources that would prevent them from having to do that. So like against this backdrop of a complete failure of the government response, against this backdrop of African and Indigenous and colonized people being the most directly and drastically impacted, and against this backdrop of the pandemic still being a major issue, the government is opening up the economy because rich people don't want to lose their money anymore. So it's just like, damn, capitalism sucks. United States sucks. Settler colonialism sucks. And we got to organize to keep each other safe because they are not going to do it. Next section, we want to talk about, and I'm going to like go through these a little quickly because we are over time, but I also want to make sure that I'm giving space for Ebony. So next section I want to talk about is what's going on in the African world and the African diaspora in terms of COVID-19. So thus far, the African continent has been much less impacted by the pandemic, you know, than other places. And that part of that is because Africa was prepared. Africa has already faced pandemics of very serious viruses, and the whole world turned their back. So Africa had no choice but to build up infrastructure, medical infrastructure, testing infrastructure, education infrastructure to address pandemics when they came. And so definitely part of the reason why Africa has seen lower infections than other landmasses is because of African organization and African innovation, period. It's because our people were prepared. But despite that, you know, because it's a virus that spreads so quickly, we're seeing, you know, more cases on the continent every day. The continent as a whole recently broke 200,000 total positive COVID-19 cases, and it just broke 5,500 deaths in Africa as a whole. The most as of June 10th, so as of yesterday. The most affected countries are Azania or South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, Algeria, Ghana, Sudan, Morocco, and Cameroon. Nigeria is obviously like the first biggest economy in Africa, and South Africa is the second. And so there is, again, on the continent, the same tension where the government, imposed a lockdown that was imposed by force and like criminalized poor and working class African people. And then when like the ruling class of those countries was like, wait, we need to exploit some labor, we're going to lose money. They're like, okay, like let's start opening up the economy. So despite the fact that South Africa, for example, has like the second highest number of infections on the continent, South Africa is opening up 95% of its schools and opening up its economy again, even though the pandemic is slowly getting worse. So again, we see this tension between like the basic needs of human beings and like life versus the profit motive. And the profit motive under capitalism always wins. Even though the pandemic is like on no level under control, even though people were asked to lock down and were not given like basic necessities like food or running water in Africa, and also that happened in the United States, like even though these lockdowns were enforced by violence and people like rolled with it, like the wishes of the wealthy people outweighs everything. So before even like figuring out the public health response, governments feel pressured to bend to the will of the ruling class in order to make sure they don't lose any income. And the sacrifice is always us. It's always poor working class African people. And so we're seeing that in the United States, and we're also seeing that in Africa. And that is a direct consequence of capitalism and imperialism as systems that exploit our people. Thoughts on that, Ebony? Anything you want to add?
No, but yes to everything. The United States, Jesus Christ.
It's a really awful place. And it's like so, like they stole from the whole world. They stole us. They stole our land. They stole indigenous people's land. They stole from the whole Western Hemisphere, Southeast Asia. Like they stole so much and they have so much wealth. And they're just like, we're not going to use any of this to like save your life. We're just going to watch you die. And then we're going to see if we can get more wealth from that somehow. It's wild. So yeah, that's what's going on in Africa. We definitely want to keep an eye on how the pandemic is developing on the continent. And we want to give y'all that information from an African perspective, because I guarantee you, if you like turn on CNN and hear them talk about Africa, it's going to be something really racist. But if you hear it from us, it's going to be from the perspective of African people. So yeah. Next up, New Mexico updates in terms of COVID-19 and also in terms of how the government of New Mexico is targeting Black Lives Matter organizers. So first up, New Mexico is almost at 10,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19. To the credit, I guess, of the state government to some level, they like responded very quickly early on to attempt to control the spread of the pandemic. And so we had our infection rate growing a lot more slowly than other places, but now we are catching up. So we are at 9,250 confirmed cases as of last night. New Mexico is also second in the nation for COVID-19 infections in children, second in the nation. And the first confirmed case of Kawasaki disease, which is like a inflammatory syndrome that affects children specifically due to COVID-19, was found in a kid in New Mexico. And so it's actually really, really serious in terms of its impact on children and also on indigenous people who are being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And again, like the cavalry is not coming. And against this backdrop of like a inadequate public health response and growing infections, we are seeing New Mexico going with these staged reopenings. It's like they're opening up businesses, restaurants are opening up for dining in. And I've driven by restaurants, because I will not go to a restaurant right now, I tell you that, but I've driven by restaurants and people are eating outside with no masks. And like the poor waitress or whatever is like wearing a mask, like doing her best. But I'm like, damn, that's messed up. Like you're exposing people on making minimum wage to a deadly virus against their will, so people can eat out. That's wild. But yeah, so New Mexico is like going through the reopening, but New Mexico has not had a handle on a pandemic, and also is like seeing a slowly increasing rate of infections that are drastically impacting indigenous people and children. So that's like what's happening here. We also got like this rent moratorium that was a joke from the beginning for reasons that we have talked about multiple times, because they said that, not rent moratorium, eviction moratorium. So they basically said that for the duration of the pandemic, like an indeterminate time, no one could be evicted in the state of New Mexico. That's what they said. In reality, evictions were ongoing. Evictions never stopped. We have a comrade in New Mexico Circle that has had to fight an eviction because that shit did not work. And on top of that, even if you say people can be evicted, even if that was the case, if you're still charging rent, that means at the end of the moratorium, people are going to owe thousands of dollars and they're not going to have money to pay because they haven't been able to work this whole time. So an eviction moratorium without stopping rent makes no sense, has never made sense. But on top of that, the eviction moratorium in New Mexico is not actually a thing. It's not actually a thing. People are still having to fight for their housing during a pandemic, including someone in our own chapter. So it's been difficult here. I feel like we got like a slower head start than other places in terms of like the spread of the virus, but I feel like the second wave is going to be hard here. And so it's going to be extremely important to support community defense and mutual aid organizing to fill the gaps in the state's response, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And also, if you want to support the comrade in APRP New Mexico who had to fight their eviction during a pandemic, I'm going to drop our donation links in the comments, and you can Venmo us or PayPal us, and any money we raise will go towards their court costs. Because they literally, like, even if you qualify for the eviction moratorium, in order to get the eviction stopped, you are required in the state of New Mexico to go into a court and present evidence to the judge's satisfaction that you cannot pay your rent. So you still have to go to court. You'll probably still need a lawyer. That's what this comrade had to do. And they have quite a lot of money they owe that because they have not been able to work because of a pandemic, we want to help them cover. So if you have any extra to spare, please donate to the links I'm about to drop. Sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. Also, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the government of New Mexico is directly and deliberately targeting Africans who are organizing for Black Lives Matter. So about Thursday, 2 weeks ago, one of the first major and peaceful marches for Black Lives Matter happened here in Albuquerque in the International District. 1,000 people had showed up, I believe. Many of our people were there. It was like a beautiful space that folks were really like healed by and energized by. And it was organized in part by Millions for Prisoners and an organizer within Millions for Prisoners called Clifton White. Clifton White is a community organizer here in Albuquerque. He is a fixture within the African community. He has done an incredible amount of work to support our people here in the city and to support our youth. And his reward for organizing a peaceful action, and I'm not a person who necessarily believes in like peaceful actions as like a tactic, but that's what the state requires. And so they did it. They organized a peaceful action in which folks just like expressed their pain and expressed their unity and then went home. And his reward for doing that, his reward for creating that space for our people was to be followed by the police, by undercovers for multiple days, and then arrested in front of his family and taken away. And because they're like saying it was a parole violation, but they're not saying like specifically what, they're not giving any details. They're putting out all these like videos and making all these claims, but they're not backing up what they're saying about why he was arrested. Because they're saying it was a parole violation, that means he's been moved around from facility to facility and he has no access to an attorney. He cannot receive calls or visitors, and he does not get a bond. Being held without bond and no access to an attorney. That is wild. And that is happening right here in New Mexico. And actually, as we're speaking, as the show is happening, there's an action being held at the facility where Clifton White is being basically held hostage, being held as a political prisoner, organized by his partner to demand his release. To demand that this man his only crime, which is not really a crime, was fighting for our people, and his punishment is being locked up without bond and without access to a lawyer. So right now at Los Lunas Detention Center, there's an action being organized by Millions for Prisoners to demand that the governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, let this man go because he has done nothing wrong, and because all he did was organize to fight for our people to be free. To fight for our people to be free, he's locked up right now. So as Monique is saying in the comments, he was kidnapped from our people. He is being held as state property. No lawyer, can't see his family, cannot be bonded out. Like that is like, it's making me mad talking about it because like, how dare y'all? So he is being held as state property. And the only one who can let him out, who can order his release, is the governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham. And so Millions for Prisoners, Building Power for Black New Mexico, and APRP are asking folks to call the governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, at 505-476-2200 and demand that you let Clifton White out. Let that woman know that we see what you're doing and it's not okay, that we are not going to allow community members to be targeted for fighting for our people. It's not right. That man is a political prisoner and he deserves to be freed, period. Like, Millions for Prisoners and Clifton White do incredible work in the city of Albuquerque. And they also are relentless about holding the police and the mayor accountable. And I'm very sure that's the reason why they targeted them in this way. So please, if you want to fight with African organizers in Albuquerque to free Clifton White, we encourage you to call the governor, speak to your manager voice, and call the governor at 505-476-2200 and ask her why she is holding this man and demand that he be released. Let the governor know that we will not accept the targeting of African liberation organizers, period. You can also, today at 5 p.m., there is a meeting of the Police Advisory Board that is going to be talking about the APD's response to these protests, which has been incredibly violent. They have tear gas, like crowds with children. They have shown up in riot gear. The first march on Thursday, they had motherfucking tanks out there. So their response has been over the top. And the marches themselves have not, like, it's been peaceful. So, like, why are y'all doing this? So they're having this meeting to talk about the police response. And people are being encouraged to submit comments calling out what's being done to Clifton White and also calling out the violence of the police response to these protests. And you can find information about that meeting at the Millions for Prisoners New Mexico page, and also more information about Clifton White at the Millions for Prisoners New Mexico Facebook page. Also, if you go to that page, you're going to find graphics that say Free Clifton White. And the ask is that folks change their profile pictures to those graphics to, like, boost what's happening, to, like, make it known nationwide that this man is being targeted. Like, I've had comrades in Cuba sharing the story, and I'm very, very grateful. Like, the more people know, the less likely they're going to be able to disappear him or, like, railroad him. That's why it's so important to uplift the truth and uplift him and uplift his name and uplift, like, the campaign to free him, so that they cannot just, like, do in the dark some dirty ass shit that we know they're trying to do. So yeah, check out the Millions for Prisoners New Mexico Facebook page. Check out Building Power for Black New Mexico for the latest updates on the campaign to free Clifton White. Once again, this is an African liberation organizer who is being targeted for repression by the government of New Mexico, who is being held without bond and without access to an attorney or his family because he organized the Black Lives Matter March. So that's what's up with New Mexico updates. Any thoughts, Ebony? It's like a small state, but, like, I feel like it's always, like, popping. There's almost shit happening.
Yeah, no, I'm just taking it all in and definitely gonna call. Wow, it's unsurprising, but also, it's tugging at my heart. I'm like, oof. And I was just doing some. I think I was telling you this not too long ago. I was doing some, like, work on Erica Hudgens, who was a former member of the Black Panther Party, and just, like, listening to interviews by her describing, like, herself as a political prisoner, and I just I mean, I don't have words. I don't have anything intellectually cute to say right now. I just, like, want to do the work to make sure folks know what's happening with this brother. Yeah.
All right, I appreciate you. So yeah, that's up with that. Once again, please call the governor. Please let her know that we are watching the fuck shit you're doing and we're not okay with it, period. And we want him out. We want him free. Because he is a pillar in the community. He's, like, doing work. And, like Emily just said, like, there's so much work. Like, there's so much work. We need leaders. We need organizers. And so to take one out like that for organizing a march is, like, unacceptable. We cannot accept that. So yes, please make those calls. Please submit your public comments. Monica and our tech support, Andrew, just put how to submit those comments in the comments of the Facebook stream and the YouTube stream. So please check out those links. And please stay updated on this campaign by following Millions for Prisoners New Mexico and also Building Power for Black New Mexico. Other local organizing to support our people happening during COVID-19, that's happening right here in APRP New Mexico. Obviously, APRP New Mexico has launched our community defense program. If you have not heard about it, we are delivering care packages to the doorsteps of our elders who, during a pandemic, it might not be safe for them to go to the Walmart to get their needs met. And so we're literally doing their shopping and bringing it to their homes. If you want to support this work, we desperately need your help. There's, like, only seven of us. I think there's 7 of us right now. And we actually do a lot of stuff. We do the show, we do the community defense program, we do the film series, we do political education events. We're helping to organize Juneteenth this year. So we do, like, a lot. And we also do international delegations Like, we do like a lot of stuff with a really small group of people, and we would very, very much appreciate more hands, like more. If you're an African person who's like been kind of peeping what we're doing, and you're like, I support this. This seems cool. Like, please join the APRP, and like you can contribute to this work. We'll get you trained. If you have skills in things like social media and things like community defense and things like program development, you can contribute to those skills, or we can like build up your skills within the space. Completely open. It's up to you. But just want to reiterate that we are actively recruiting right now to build up our community defense projects and our political education work in New Mexico. And if you are an African in New Mexico watching this show, we need you in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So please reach out to us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Our email is aprpnewmexico@gmail.com. And please hit us up if we can get you plugged in. And also, if you're watching and you're like, this socialist revolutionary Pan-African shit is kind of intense. I don't want to do that. That's fine. If you don't want to join the APRP, please join another organization that's fighting for justice here in Albuquerque. There's many, and they all need help. They all need help. We all have not enough people, and we all need folks in our group. And there's all kinds of politics. There's anarchists, communists, socialists, queer. It all exists for you to be plugged into. So please join the organization, even if that organization is not the APRP. Like, we need all hands on deck, particularly in this period when the government is failing on every single level to protect our people, and our people are being directly impacted, most severely alongside Indigenous people. This is the time for you to get involved and help us build the infrastructure to take care of the needs of our people, so we never again have to rely on this racist ass country to take care of us. So that's what's happening with us. Community defense program is still ongoing. We're still recruiting. Also, if you're not trying to join an organization right now, but you still want to support, we are always taking donations to support the community defense program. So we take cash money in terms of, currency. If you want to donate money, you can Venmo us at APRP-New Mexico. And you can also PayPal us at paypal.me/APRP New Mexico if you want to make a donation. And that's also if you're like a non-African person who wants to help us. That's how you can do it. Donate cash money. And also, if you have a donation of shelf-stable foods like beans, rice, sanitation supplies like disinfectant or wipes, personal protective equipment like masks and gloves, we always take donations of those items. And you can contact us by email at aprpnewmexico@gmail.com or by phone at 505-298-0008. And you can coordinate a pickup or a drop off of those goods donations. So that's happening. Other things that are happening in terms of organizing to support the community during COVID-19 here in New Mexico is, of course, Albuquerque Mutual Aid. Albuquerque Mutual Aid was launched, I believe, a little bit over 2 months ago, and they have fed thousands of families in the city of Albuquerque. They're doing a very similar thing with their picking up groceries and bringing them to people's houses so that folks do not have to brave the pandemic. And so this is a completely grassroots community effort that includes like just regular people that live in Albuquerque alongside organizers that have been doing work here for a very long time, and just created this project ad hoc to support people. And it's completely donation based. And so if you are a person that needs a care package, or if you are a person who wants to make a donation to support that work, which they definitely need, you can go to ffol.org/mutual aid. And there you will find a form to request a care package and also a form to make a donation. And we encourage you to do both if you can. Also, our comrades at Free Access to Movements Child Care Collective, who have done childcare for like almost every single APRP New Mexico event since they existed, are continuing their revolutionary and radical organizing of children and youth online for the pandemic. And so they host a sing-along and story time on Saturdays at 3 p.m. And this coming Saturday, they're doing like a Pride-focused one, because it's actually Pride Month. I almost forgot because so much is going on, but it's Pride Month. So yeah, if you are interested, if you have like a youth or a baby who like misses fam, because we know like a lot of the families that like come to APRP events, like their kids like love fam. They love fam. And so if you have a child in your home who misses the connection to the community, the sing-alongs are like a great space, a great virtual space to get to connect with folks and connect with other children. So that's Saturdays at 3 p.m. And today, or this weekend, it's going to be Pride focused. And also, as usual, the John Brown Breakfast Clubs, our comrades who have shown up for us many times, do a breakfast burrito giveaway at the corner of First and Silver every single Saturday at 9 a.m. So if you are a houseless person or a food insecure person who needs a meal, a hot meal, and a care package, you can show up to that location. There's no requirement to show ID. There's no requirement to prove you have any need, because that's messed up. All you gotta do is show up and get a package, and that's it. So Saturdays, First and Silver at 9 a.m. John Bar Breakfast Club burrito giveaway. Don't miss it. So that's local organizing to support our community during COVID-19. Just like an incomplete overview of what's happening. And then final section of the show before I head to the closing is just talking about some of the many upcoming events that are happening, either being organized by APRP New Mexico or being organized by the African community here in Operty. So first up, actually no, not just African community events, because the first one is not. So first up is the Unofficial Albuquerque Pride Car Parade, happening Saturday at 11 a.m. and it starts at Central and 5th, and it goes to Central and San Pedro. So the official Albuquerque Pride is problematic. I'm just gonna be straight up with it. Like, it's mad problematic. It's like nationalistic. It's like kind of racist. But this is not organized by the official Albuquerque Pride. This is being organized by community members. Chicano and Latinx trans people decided, like, because the official Pride was canceled, but because of the pandemic, we're gonna make our own space. And that's Car Parade is that space. So it is COVID-19 safe. You're not going to be in proximity to people. The ask is that you like decorate your vehicle with messages of support. And all you got to do is like come into the parade at any point on Central. So you can start at 5th and Central, or you can come in any place. I'm planning to join at like Central and probably University, because that's near where I live. And then you can just join the parade and then leave anytime you want. So it starts at 11 a.m. At Central and 5th. The route ends at Central and San Pedro, and you can join at any point along the route starting at 11 a.m. So decorate those cars. There's going to be two APRP cars out there with APRP signs uplifting our queer African relatives and our trans African relatives. So we'll be out there. We hope to see you there. Also, in another celebration of Pride for APRP New Mexico, we are going to host our Pan-African film series, which, as folks know, happens on the second Saturday of every single month. We did not stop for the pandemic. We just put it online, so now it's virtual. And so this coming Saturday at 2 p.m., we are showing Paris is Burning. If you've never heard of Paris is Burning, is a documentary about African and colonized youth, queer and trans youth, living in New York in the 80s and how they created their own spaces to protect each other and also to be their full selves and express themselves. So it's like working class African colonized youth who, because of colonization, because of capitalism, are often marginalized within African communities, creating their own spaces to defend each other and protect each other. We're going to show that movie. We're going to talk about it. If you've never seen it, please join us. If you have seen it, please join us. That's Saturday at 2 p.m. and that is free. And you can watch it on our Facebook, on our YouTube, and on our Twitter channel, just like this show. And again, that film series happens every second Saturday of the month at 2 p.m. Mountain Time. Also, there's so much stuff. I feel like every time I'm not doing anything, the next day is like mad stuff. Okay, so next up of the show is this coming next Thursday at the 18th, same time, 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And for that show, we're going to have two other members of APRP New Mexico talking about Juneteenth. Because Juneteenth is the next day. It's celebrated June 19th all over the United States by African people. And we want to talk about the history of Juneteenth. We want to talk about African resistance to enslavement. And we also want to connect the celebration of Juneteenth to the global African struggle. So if you want to hear how we do that, tune in Thursday, the 18th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time for that next episode of the show. Also, Juneteenth. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh my God, I'm talking too much. Oh yeah, so on Juneteenth, Friday's June 19th, the All African People's Revolutionary Party is going to have a virtual presentation of our workshop, We Saved Ourselves. We Saved Ourselves is basically a celebration of African resistance to chattel slavery, in which we argue that the reason why the transatlantic slave trade ended is because our ancestors fought back, period. It was not because Europeans were like, oh, this is wrong, let's stop it. It was because African people fought back and forced it to stop. And so if you want to hear about African resistance to slavery in the United States, in the Caribbean, in Central and South America, and in Africa, because if you've ever heard that African people didn't fight for us in Africa during slavery, it was a lie. It was a point blank lie. It happened all over the continent, and we're going to talk about it. So We Saved Ourselves is a presentation about African resistance to slavery. It is free, and we're going to present that on Friday, June 19th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And that is going to be an event that is only for African people. So it's a closed space for just our folks to have this conversation, to have this presentation. So if you're an African person who's watching, who's interested, we ask that you message us on our Facebook page or email us at aprpnewmexico@gmail.com, because we're going to be strict about African only, because we are it's very important to us to create that space in this particular moment when our folks are experiencing a lot of trauma in public. We need our own spaces, and so that's what that is. So please hit us up if you're interested in attending and you're an African person. Also, Operty Juneteenth is the very next day. Operty Juneteenth is happening in person Saturday, June 20th, from 5 to 10 p.m. at Roosevelt Park. A coalition of African organizations, including the African People's Revolutionary Party, including Millions for Prisoners, including Building Power for Black New Mexico, including BLM, ABQ, are organizing a Juneteenth that is going to be socially distanced, family-friendly, and African-centered, period. So that's open to everybody, but it's going to be an African-centered space. And so if you want to see like some of the best African entertainers in Albuquerque, if you want to eat some of our food, if you want to be around your people, and if you want to hear about some of the really great African organizing that's happening in the city, then please turn out for Albuquerque Juneteenth 2020, happening 5 to 10 p.m. at Roosevelt Park here in Albuquerque. Also that same day, BLM ABQ is hosting a march in Santa Fe. They're going to meet at the Santa Fe Plaza, June 20th from 12 to 3 p.m. We're going to be marching. So you can actually do both things, because Santa Fe is 30 minutes away. So if you want to like march it at lunchtime and then party with us in the park in the evening, then you can totally do that. And we encourage you to do so. So much stuff. Oh yeah, and then also the Comrade Ajamu from Operty California chapter has his own show where he talks about a different political education topic every single show, Sundays at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. And you can find that on his Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AjamuUmi. And this weekend, this Sunday, he's going to be talking about what the role of Europeans is in this movement. Like, if you are like, I'm a white person, what do I do? Then watch that show and stop asking us, because he's going to tell you. So yeah, I'm gonna, so that was the New Mexico event updates. And now we're gonna head to the closing. So once again, my name is Onya Sanwu. This is Ebony Oldham, and I'll toss it to you in a second for any closing remarks. This has been Weekly Pan-African News Live, presented by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, New Mexico chapter. We are a revolutionary Pan-African Socialist Party, building African political power in New Mexico. We are one chapter of an international organization based in Africa. And we created this show because we want to present you news, updates, and analysis from a revolutionary African perspective. Ebony, any closing thoughts?
Organize, organize, organize. Bye.
Yes, perfect. So yes, thank you so much. This was Ebony, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Portland, brilliant African feminist, also organizing the Black Feminist Kitchen. Check that out on Facebook. Sign up for the summer school. And once again, this is the Weekly Pan-African News Live. We are offering People's Revolutionary Party in New Mexico. We believe when Africa is free, Africans everywhere will be free, and we are always ready